We'll now start with the first technical session on the topic Future of Digital Libraries, case study of Stanford University by Dr. Michael Keller, who is the Vice Provost and University Librarian, Director of Academic Information Resources, Stanford University. He is also the Ida M. Green University Librarian, Director of Academic Information Resources, publisher of Stanford University Press, as well as the founder of Highwire Press. As a university librarian for the past 25 plus years, Dr. Keller has been a national and international leader in transitioning university libraries to digital formats and an advocate for the digital sharing of information resources around the world. Currently, he is the chairman of International Image Interoperability Framework, IIIF Consortium, and Board of Directors, Council on Library and Information Resources, USA. Due to medical emergency, Dr. Keller also could not deliver his talk in person, and he has sent a recorded video of his session.
Let me start by quoting a famous and wonderful Hindu philosopher and religious figure, namely Buddha. Buddha, who rises and is educated in Delhi at a wonderful Hindu temple there. I visited it, it's fantastic. Buddha has the following quote, which I urge all of you to reflect upon. And that quote is that every journey begins with but a single step. And we might also alter that notion just a little bit to restate it in the following way. Every journey begins and continues with but a single step. All of us participating in this workshop today will have our lives changed by the considerations, the thoughts, the ideas for innovation, but also the ideas for what I might call informed continuity in research libraries. I am looking forward to the results of all of your deliberations and your considerations of these various speakers and their presentations, the questions and answers, the communication from individuals and from the whole group as indicators of new possibilities, new developments that we might consider, we should consider. So this workshop will create a new team. It's going to be a highly distributed team. And the team members will then, I hope, in turn, create new teams at their institutions and in their associations. So now let me turn to what we might call trends in digital library development. And of course, these trends, of which there are about 10, I present to you on the basis of our experiences at Stanford over the last 30 years, and really before that, but particularly over the last 30 years. And let me point out also that the Geo Institute, its library, and the Geodigital Library are all meant to be modeling institutions, modeling services, prototyping new methods, new combinations of old methods, new thoughts, and testing those prototypes in collaboration with the Stanford libraries and Stanford University. We are all in this particular constellation recognizing that maybe our best contribution will be modeling, will be creating at the level of the Geo Institute an organization that might produce new models of organization, new models of research, new models of interdisciplinary work, new models of teamwork, new models of teaching and learning that may be useful to India and may be interesting and of significance to the rest of the world. And in this context, it's important to realize that this modeling business means that there has to be some very intense work by teams, perhaps even small teams, 5 to 10 people, with bits and pieces of the work being undertaken by those members, but the general consideration being undertaken by a team or teams. The point is that as we do our work as professionals, and I'm going to start talking about these trends in just a second, the notion of interdisciplinary collaborative approaches with teams of co-equals, but different specialties, make a huge difference. And as these applications, these organizational constructs, these methods, these philosophical constructs are built in prototype fashion, they eventually could be useful and spread to others. And others might provide feedback and work with one another to perfect, extend, elaborate these methods in support of the larger mission, which is to make possible for people to have lives of significance in and of themselves, in their own family and community constructs, but also in terms of confronting some of the difficult challenges that are now in front of us. We've all had difficult challenges over the long histories of our nations. And I remind you, I hardly need to remind you, that the history of India goes back several millennia, 5 millennia. You all carry that tradition. We need to extend that tradition as well as modify it on an ongoing basis for the future in order to confront some seriously difficult challenges facing all of mankind, not just in India. I'll come back to that later today. So, service at Geo Institute, in the Geo Library, the Geo Digital Library, as a model builder, a prototyper for testing and for responses from people who make use of the prototypes to improve them. And second, the important idea of teamwork, internal teamwork, as well as external teamwork across institutions, mixed teams. It's been very successful at Stanford and elsewhere. It will be very successful at Geo and in India. So, several truisms, 10 of them. I'm sorry I don't have a smart slide for you, but here's what they are. The first is that building research libraries, their collections, both virtual, i.e. digital, and real, physical, as an activity never stops. We're always in the act of assembling new materials for new research, sometimes stimulating that research, for new teaching and for new learning, and indeed for supporting lifelong learners. And the combination of the traditional materials, the physical materials, with the digital materials actually spells strength. Some people believe that everything that's needed is already on the web and easily accessible, but we know differently. We know that it's not. It's an end game that we might aspire to, but fundamentally we have to understand our own traditions, our own history, and even that recent history that's represented in documents that may be physical. Certainly recent documents are also digital, but are arcane or hidden or deliberately kept from the general populace. We as librarians and documentarians need to collect this material, collect archival collections, collect images and data sets and text sets for use in research and teaching and learning. And to the best of our ability, we need to anticipate the needs of researchers and teachers and learners, including especially lifelong learners. Because once we've had the benefit of what we might call an organized curriculum and organized research, where there's consideration of the past and of the future by professors and other instructors and researchers, we need to build on that, and we need to stimulate that We need to take advantage of it, and we need to do so on an ongoing basis. And as you will hear from these many presenters over the course of the coming days, there are lots of opportunities and also lots of challenges in that very work. So my first point is that building research libraries never stops, and it's not just digital, and it's not just physical, and it's not just published works, it's unpublished works, manuscripts, archives, and the like. And indeed, in many cases, it's also physical materials and images of physical materials, as well as what we might call artworks, virtual and digital artworks, and other expressions, cultural expressions. My second point is this, and it goes to the point of teamwork, but also on the dependence of our libraries, archives, and museums on informed decisions made by subject specialists, by curators, and their colleagues in acquisitions, cataloging, public services, especially reference services, and digital and physical archives, in combination with our excellent library, archival, museum, IT specialists, engineers, developers who work hand in glove with us to bring our new acquisitions into discovery environments and into storage and archival situations where these materials, virtual and actual, may be delivered in support of curricula, of courses, in support of individual considerations as students and researchers write new papers, and in support of the long-term meaning of what it means to be an educated person in a dynamic society. And this is where, once again, the lifelong learning aspects come into play. Let me remind you that there's a wonderful social science, I would say, principle, which goes to the point that most of us change either careers or our work at an institution or among institutions or in our specialties roughly every 5 to 10 years. And each time we change our employers, change our specialty, change our approaches, we need to gather information in order to be successful in the sense of being effective in our work, in support of our mission and in consolidation with others of the grand mission in support of the lives of our fellow citizens, whether of a nation or of the world at large. So subject specialists and curators in our context at Stanford spend a lot of their time anticipating needs by acquiring, before they're called upon, materials in support of research and teaching and learning, including lifelong learning. This anticipation is quite important, but we also have to have systems where if we've missed something, we can quickly acquire what we've missed in order to support the ongoing work of our colleague professors as researchers and as instructors. And we need to make use of those quick response mechanisms in order to be supportive of the scholars in training, the graduate students and postdocs. So now I turn to several other trends that come under the heading of advancing libraries, including especially digital libraries, in support of formal and informal instruction and research. The pandemic has created what we might call a huge challenge, and ironically as well, it's created a situation where, in effect, a lab for providing library collections and services in support of research, instruction, and learning has been conducted. Been conducted while millions of people lost their lives to this terrible COVID-19 virus. But nevertheless, it has been a lab. And one of the first points I need to make to all of you is the rapid prototyping of services in support of remote instruction by way of e-collections, e-reserves, digitization services when there wasn't an e-version of something that was required by an instructor or a scholar in the making, and generally supplementing in e-form the vast collections that some of us have, but were not accessible because of our need to stay apart from one another for months, and really for most of a year and a half, so that we didn't transmit this terrible virus to one another.
Wow, no, sir. आपको 10 hours में हर रोज भी बिग जमा आउट ऑफ स्टॉक हो गया।
In a frictionless way to our patrons, to our clients, has been a terribly important result of this lab. And it's a result along with the fact of remote work of our library staff and the ways that we have supported that remote work that I see as a positive outcome of this terrible pandemic that has killed millions of people. The second principle that I want to point out to you, and it's a terribly important one, is that the fundamental basis of advances by researchers, whether in higher education institutions or in research institutions by themselves or in industry settings, involves communication of results, and then a kind of dialogue between those who created the results or reported the results and those who have read the reports and are perhaps attempting to apply the results or at least comprehend the results. This dialogue, this communications circuit is terribly important for the advancement of humankind. Scholarship, scientific, social scientific, humanistic, is incomplete without this dialogue between the scholars, their students, their formal students, and their informal students, informed people, intellectual people anywhere, and especially lifelong learners. So what we in our profession as librarians and archivists, documentalists, have to provide for is constant engagement, constant contributions, and providing the means by which this communication might occur. Some of it as letters to the editor, some of it in the form of communications back to a library from a user of a library service. It is this principle of the cycle of communication between those who originate information and those who make use of it is terribly important. And I believe that every research library should provide on every web page a feedback button that enables that communication to occur. And sometimes that communication will have several hops. So a reference librarian might take the query or the demand and then send it on to others. It's very important. The next one is enabling collaboration that results in effective access to resources that an individual institution or many individual institutions may not hold, but which is held by at least one other institution. And this is where the matter of the International Image Interoperability Framework, whose architect is Tom Kramer, comes into play. This methodology, and it is rather unique actually, makes it possible for sharing of documents, sharing of images of works of art and culturally important works, including modern moving images and 3D images and so forth, in a way that doesn't affect the fundamental nature of the object, the information object, the cultural object in question. It makes possible sharing for analysis, for study, for annotations where one person may have an insight or an opinion about a whole object, a page, an image, a portion of a page, a portion of an image, and report on it to others without changing the information object, the cultural object at all. This is one of the new features of the digital world. And once again, it's terribly important. So if we are capable of creating a vast network of cultural institutions, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, we are capable thereby of sharing valuable information and access to these cultural objects and information objects for the betterment of all. One of the Geo Institute programs that starts, I hope, we all hope, in July of this year, has to do with artificial intelligence and data science. The second program, the other program that will launch, I hope, also in July, is that of digital media and marketing communications. Both of these involve access to or stimulate the creation of data sets about behaviors, about performance, about what we might call the epidemiology of use of information objects and cultural objects. These data sets and the analysis of them, and in the case of the Geo Institute, artificial intelligence is vitally linked to data sets, makes the possibility of interpretations that formerly were relatively difficult to make or even impossible, possible and active. And these data sets and artificial intelligence, this sense of what it is that the digital media provide, both good and bad, and what marketing communications might make a difference to a whole community, to a nation, to random isolated consumers, is vitally important, really fundamental in a way. Bringing those data sets, causing them to be made available, in some cases causing them to be built at all, including mashups from various data sets to make new constellations of data, makes the difference. And it is the libraries, in the case of Stanford, and I presume ultimately of the Geo Institute, that will acquire and license, or just acquire and provide an archival service, as well as a scratch pad or a digital sandbox where scholars can analyze and make use of the data sets and recover and repeat their work with variations of analysis in order to develop reports on what they've discovered that might be useful to others. So the whole notion of a data set, an image set, a text set, or a combination set is really the new wave, and a vital wave it is. We don't yet know what will be discovered, but what we do know is that there will be discoveries which formerly were frankly not possible. So this is part of the ongoing work of a university, how to develop new knowledge and then pervade it for that communication loop that I've just spoken about. Another aspect of, a vital aspect of what libraries do is that of presenting elements of their collections or elements of mashed up collections, as it were, for consumption by others. We must all understand the following construction. Scholars today must be deeply knowledgeable and completely au courant with relatively narrow fields of investigation. It's quite difficult for there to be polymaths crossing lots of disciplinary boundaries and making sense of all the knowledge that has been developed and communicated over the past centuries and even millennia. So by their nature, in order to be successful, scholars must be, as it were, a mile deep in what they comprehend, what is in the library of the mind, but only an inch wide. Librarians, archivists, documentarians, all have to have a fundamental understanding of many, many different disciplines, and even then there'll be specialists. But they cannot even begin to be a mile deep in what they comprehend. So what we say is librarians, archivists, etc., are an inch deep, but a mile wide. So the combination of understanding disciplines deeply and understanding across disciplines in a relatively shallow manner drives what we do in support of these deep scholars. The best of them understand that and this principle and respect it. One of our roles is to make sure that naive, I'm now speaking in a kind of relative term, people naive in one discipline might benefit from ideas and documents, including images, of other disciplines. So once again, thanks to Tom Kramer's work with his team and the Stanford Library's digital library services and systems, has developed a exhibit application called Spotlight, which enables ordinary mortals, with a little help from some specialist staff on Tom's team, to develop digital exhibits, virtual exhibits, across all domains of knowledge: the arts, the humanities, area studies, human rights studies, and all the sciences, so that knowledge and themes in one narrow zone of our collections might be apprehended, comprehended at some level, and stimulating others in other disciplines who don't have that knowledge. We have over 100 of these exhibits developed in the last few years, and many of them get thousands of hits every week. One or two of them have changed the shape of whole disciplines, and I now refer specifically to ancient, medieval, and early modern manuscript studies, all of which have changed thanks to our work on the Matthew Parker Library on the history of religion, particularly Protestant religion, in the United Kingdom from the 6th century to the 16th century. So what I'm saying is that our responsibility is not just to collect and to provide discovery possibilities for intellectual and actual physical or virtual access to our collections, to our clients, our institutional colleagues, to lifelong learners, but also to provide synthetic exhibits that gather information and present that information in support of all people gaining better understanding about certain trends, certain events in our own histories, from our own collections that might make a difference to others. These exhibits are really important. And sometimes they're combination exhibits, both virtual and physical. The narrative of each exhibit is quite important. Oftentimes it's not explicit, but implied. This stimulates people to think and to imagine what their narrative on the basis of an exhibit might be and how that exhibit might relate to their own experiences, including their own library of the mind, archive of the mind, as I've mentioned. An aspect of what we do internal to Stanford, and now over the last couple, 3 decades, is collaboration with other institutions who are doing interesting things, who have significant collections, who are devoted more or less to the same principles that we have in support of the improvement of humanity worldwide. These collaborations have resulted in new access to collections, new modes of sharing. I've witnessed the IIIF, but also basically what might be regarded as a kind of international interlibrary lending and borrowing situation, although the borrowing might just be virtual borrowing, and in the development of methodologies, techniques, and workflows, as well as applications. Together with such wonderful libraries as that of the British Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the libraries of the National Library of Germany, the Deutsche National Bibliothek, the library at the University of Göttingen, the Bayerische Staatslibrary, the great library of Munich and Bavaria, the Vatican Library and other libraries in Italy, developing relationships with libraries in Ireland, libraries in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, great relationships in Mexico, relationships of value in Japan, and elsewhere in East Asia, especially with some of our colleagues in Australia and New Zealand, and now, thankfully, with the Geo Institute and other libraries of note, and particularly the Bandakar Manuscript Library in India, which is going to be really important to our scholars at Stanford in Indian history. Terrific relationships. These collaborations not only bring collections, but they bring other possibilities. And I mentioned now something in particular, which is only becoming interesting in a kind of research sense. Our colleagues at the Bavarian State Library, the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek, have been making use of some technology built in Germany for image recognition. And they have demonstrated to us how this image recognition application makes possible new findings that advance knowledge, that make new methodologies, new interpretations possible. This was before artificial intelligence. And now with our artificial intelligence, vast sets of images can be examined and new relationships shown. I mean, virtually shown. It's quite interesting, and I think quite important. I turn now to a matter that I've been mentioning continuously, I think, this morning, and that is how we might support and do support lifelong learning. Lifelong learning for our alumni, for our communities, for companies and industries, for families. To the extent possible, we need to balance our work in support of lifelong learners with the development of and instruction of new knowledge. But nevertheless, we have to do it. And some of that has to do with providing access, virtual access, as well as physical access to individuals and companies in exchange for the dialogue that I've earlier mentioned that has to do with what might be questioning and answering information resources or people that provide them in a productive way. Lifelong learning for those of us in the community of people who have been educated in universities and institutes is terribly important. We carry a burden for a nation. We are intended to make the lives of our fellow citizens better. We are meant to help confront major challenges, challenges such as climate change, challenges such as this current pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, challenges of history, of geography, of religious tensions. We all carry beyond the basic education that makes possible life in these times. Everyone needs to be able to do arithmetic. Everyone needs to be able to read. Everyone needs to be able to talk with one's neighbors and learn from those conversations. Beyond that, we have responsibilities. And it seems to me that lifelong learning is one of those attributes that has to be instilled, and methods for judgment, critical judgment of what's going on around one, whether locally or distant and in some distant fashion, is a key aspect of what a successful education pervades to individuals. How do we critically judge what's going on around us and select what we might do to improve the lives of others? That has to do with lifelong learning. That has to do with us remaining successful and effective in our chosen profession, or in a new profession that we approach in the middle of our lives. And this group of 60 individuals and the many people that are presenting to you offer a particularly good example of lifelong learning. We're all going to be learning from the presentations that will be made possible by this workshop. We will all benefit either directly or indirectly, either immediately or over time, or both, for the work by the study groups and then their reports to the whole group and beyond in the course of this week. We are all lifelong learners. So I ask you to be self-reflective about what's going on here and understand why lifelong learning is important to this group, but also to everyone else like us who are no longer 22 years old or 25 years old, but are somewhat older and still learning and still contributing. I want to close with number 10. Number 10 may be obvious, but it is the work of people in research libraries and archives and museums never to stop gathering, elaborating, and providing both wide and deep collections. These are not necessarily large collections, they could be, but they should be evolving collections. They can't be static. They can't be static because we are not rocks. We are humans. We solely have this self-consciousness, this possibility of reflecting on what's occurring and putting our knowledge and our appreciation, our apprehension, comprehension of what's going on around us, whether immediately around us or at some distance, including around the world, putting our reflections and our best thoughts about how to interpret our holdings and how to document what's going on so that maybe, just perhaps, we don't continue as a species to make mistakes, to make challenges appear that were unnecessarily appearing, that hinder relationships, hinder the existence of the species at all. We have major, major challenges facing us. And it is the role of librarians, archivists, information scientists, museum people, in developing collections of relevance and also predictive collections so that these grand challenges can be met. At least we can attempt to meet them. The development of the vaccines, which, by the way, are being manufactured in India at a rate unlike any other country in the world for India, but also for the rest of the world, all of that knowledge was made available through the work of people in research institutions, universities, institutes, pharmaceutical companies, medical research in private institutions, and communicated through publishing often, but not solely. Data provided, and still data being gathered, and I hope forever, that enables new vaccines, new boosters that confront the terrible challenge of these variant versions of this COVID-19 flu virus, which could kill millions of more people if we don't confront them with these new findings. And I use this example particularly because whatever goes on in the labs, whatever goes on in populations that are affected by the COVID-19, and all human populations eventually will be affected, whatever experiences we have as a result of vaccinations or the results of people who refuse to be vaccinated, what happens to them are of terribly high importance to all of us. This is a single example of why documentation of this whole pandemic and the results of the science that was so quickly and effectively applied, and the engineering, especially as seen in India, in manufacturing these new models of vaccines that confront this terrible illness that has killed so many people. The point I'm making is we have an obligation as professionals to take care of that information. It's all digital. We need to have digital archives. We need to have digital hosting services, repositories that make it available to scholars and scientists, engineers around the world. This is the way we contribute to a more healthy world. Thank you all very much for your attention.